Welcome everyone to Trailer Talk episode 5, Labor Productivity Data and Reporting in 2024, Critical Things to be Aware of. In this Trailer Talk, our Rhumbix experts, Skillett and Gregg Schipp, are going to review some emerging trends and factors driving improvements in labor productivity and how best to use them. Hello, gentlemen.
How's it going,
Hello.
Tyler? Good to be back.
It's going. As we begin, can you maybe share some thoughts on the current state of labor productivity reporting and where many companies may struggle today? Guy, why don't you take this to lead us off?
Sure, I can talk a little about this. I'd say that firstly, production tracking remains a really challenging area for many contractors. So if any of our listeners are struggling with this, you're not alone. And there are quite a few reasons for this, and we're going to talk about a few of them in the discussion today and some of the emerging trends that people are pursuing to try and enhance some of these underlying issues and challenges. I think the first thing to really talk about are some of the systems and processes involved with production tracking and reporting. And really one of the first things that we need to talk about is timekeeping. Labor productivity, performance measurement in construction is ultimately a measurement of inputs over outputs. And for labor productivity, the input is almost always represented in terms of hours. And what this means is in order to get accurate and reliable production tracking, i.e. the representation of the output, you really need to have accurate and reliable timekeeping. And in reality, there are many, many ways that people struggle with timekeeping, whether that's because the contractor is still on paper, you're using disconnected systems on older ERPs. If you don't have good, accurate timekeeping, it's really the old adage of garbage in and garbage out. The data and the reporting just won't be reliable. So timekeeping really remains the foundation. And just to sort of highlight some of this, oftentimes we get asked by contractors who'd like to use our production tracking reporting features because this is where they think they have struggles. And when we dig into their workflows, you realize that actually timekeeping is a challenge they're struggling with most because they just don't have the data in a timely way with the requisite amounts of quality or data cleanliness to support the improvements they're trying to make. And so this is why we ended up building timekeeping first of all at Rhumbix, because in order to deliver the improvements that you're looking for, you need that clean underlying baseline of information. So yeah, I mean, if you're a construction contractor that is struggling with production tracking and timekeeping as a source of the friction, really that's where you should start, I would say, to begin with.
Yeah, okay, great. But assuming timekeeping is working for the subcontractor, where are the challenges with production tracking? Maybe Gregg, you can take this one.
Yeah, for sure. So, timekeeping is definitely a must to lay the foundation for production tracking. But first, let's talk about how production tracking works, and then we'll discuss some of the challenges that come along with it. Production tracking typically involves people documenting what work was installed or completed in a given reporting period. And that period is usually defined by the timekeeping workflow. People will track installed quantities in a variety of different ways, which we'll discuss in more detail a bit later on. And that information will then be entered into the finance and accounting platform. Here, production data is combined with timekeeping and budget information, usually as part of what is called the job cost module or job cost reporting workflows, typically what we see.
Yeah.
The ERP will perform calculation of input hours and installed quantities and compare with the budgeted hours. The idea is you're looking at how many hours did it take versus how many hours should it have taken. And the ERP will then compare the actual with what was estimated. This usually is called the earned hours. The idea being how many hours will you get paid or expect to get paid? The earned versus actual is your metric of labor productivity while we're here talking today. Now, there are many other metrics that ERPs will calculate as part of labor production reporting, but at a high level, that is how a big part of how it works. So thinking about kind of now that we've defined what production tracking is, what are some of the challenges? Where do those challenges live? Let's talk about production tracking data, the capture piece, first of all. Now, in an ideal world, timekeeping and production tracking will be captured in the same system from the field. Within Rhumbix, for instance, your foreman and field leadership will be empowered with the tools and knowledge to be able to document hours and production simultaneously, all in one place. Now, this is not a one-to-one match. Time and production don't always happen at the same time, and that's for good reason. But you do want the ability to document the hours worked and the production in the same system. So that data can move from the field to office, both in terms of stakeholders and systems, and eventually to insights. Now, where we see folks using different systems for time entry and then production tracking over here, you often have hours going in without quantities or quantities without hours. And when these things get out of sync, it can really impact the reliability of your reporting.
That makes sense. Reducing the number of sources of data for field labor productivity will make downstream processing more efficient. Is that what you're saying? What else
absolutely.
is there, Greg?
Guy, why don't you take this one?
Sure. So we discussed a little about how companies report out production tracking, from the ERPs typically. I think it's helpful to talk a little bit about the context in which production tracking data is generated. Construction is pretty unique from an accounting perspective insofar as it uses what we call job cost accounting. So each project has its own work breakdown structure broken out by cost codes, with your scope for labor, equipment, materials, subcontractor costs, all broken out by job. And then this project level data, this what we call a work breakdown structure or cost breakdown structure, will then roll out and roll up at the enterprise level to generate your sort of typical general ledger accounting, your usual financial metrics on your bottom line and your financial reporting. Those projects, however, are performed by project teams, and the project manager is typically interested in project level performance. And in many cases, the data that people are looking for is tailored towards these projects. So, if you think about forecasting work in progress, estimate of completion, contingency management, they tend to be very project centric. So one of the challenges that we see is that a lot of the reporting that comes out from the ERP tends to shine a light on how productivity is impacting performance on a particular project, so an individual job. But what they don't do is generate really any good insights on how performance and project productivity, or those metrics that drive productivity, are impacting the organization. So yeah, you'll get financial metrics at the project level, at the company level, but you don't really get a really good indication of factors that are driving outcomes consistently across all of your projects from an operational perspective. And we think that's a really, really big weakness in the industry, because people have to try and extrapolate how things that are happening on projects that are underreported in ERPs roll up to impact labor productivity and organizational performance at the project level. And so that's one of the big challenges that we see. It can be quite difficult to get a sense for where you have these common challenges on projects that require your attention, but you don't really have the information on the inside. You don't really see the woods for the trees, so to speak. And that construct there is, I think, pretty applicable to a lot of the challenges that organizations have around generating enterprise data strategies and how to get the most from their data.
Are there any other issues that arise from the current state of ERPs, you guys?
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it. So I think, many construction ERPs can be quite old and have been slow to adapt to the latest approaches for data and system architecture. Many ERPs are still on premise and have not made the move to the cloud. Additionally, some of them haven't embraced mobility and getting good data from the field. So the information that's going in is unreliable, inaccurate, and oftentimes late. So one of the biggest challenges is that they just don't play nice with other tools because they don't have integrations or APIs that customers can leverage to exchange data. ERPs are usually the source of a lot of the data that contractors want to report out on, but ERPs are rarely the source of all the data you might want to report out on. From a big data and insight standpoint, that's a real challenge for reporting in 2024.
Yeah. So what are we seeing people do about it?
Yeah, I'll jump in here with a few things. So, ERPs really being the foundation for a lot of organizations' data strategies. One of the things that we're starting to see a lot of now is contractors move to cloud-hosted ERP solutions. And what's driving this? Many of the ERP vendors are responding to some of the data and reporting challenges that we've spoken about by updating or end-of-lifing some of the older on-premise software. Sage 300, Timberline moving to Intact, which is Sage's more modern cloud-hosted offering, is a prime example of that. And then, there are ERPs that are not doing that, in which contractors are reluctant to get off. And for a lot of those stakeholders, a lot of those contractors, we're seeing vendors who are able to take that foundation as challenging as it may be, but then build upon the underlying ERP solution with additional capabilities. And those capabilities can be anything from layering on Power BI tools that essentially will take data and make it more available, to essentially moving elements of the ERP to the cloud, including sort of more comprehensive data management solutions like data lakes and reporting ecosystems to overcome some of the reporting challenges of those tools, but at least make the data more accessible. And actually, for anyone in that latter camp, there's some really interesting content that's been put out by BRIQ, B-R-I-Q. They have some really good resources on their website for folks who are looking to try and build upon a data foundation from their ERP without going through the whole rigmarole of switching ERPs live, which can be very, very tricky. But I'd say generally, regardless of how or what contractors are doing, there's this big trend of moving either the entire solution or moving data to the cloud that's really sort of streamlining and supercharging access to data. And in turn, the ability to combine data, merge data, and ultimately generate insights that are not otherwise available. And really that's, I think, core, big picture industry trends that are driving enhancers in labor productivity in the industry that we're really seeing right now.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So if folks move to the cloud and their data is more accessible, how do people really extract maximum value from these changes? Gregg, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I would love to. And we're going to start getting into the weeds here of advanced enterprise level data approaches for companies. But how can you stitch all your data together? What stories can it tell you? And how can you create a culture of learning at your organization so you can really be proactive, forward-looking, and forward-thinking? As a contractor, if you have all of your data sources, your ERP, PM solution, field tools, estimating solutions, all of these working together in a way that the data is accessible, you then have the foundation for modern enterprise data architecture that the latest approaches in construction really require and necessitate. In the way I think about it, you don't need to be held back by old ERPs and whatever construction is doing. You can start to leverage, the advances in data science and tooling across all industries. And that's not something that has been accessible to the construction industry before.
Yeah, can you give us some specific examples? Maybe, Guy, you can share with us.
Yeah, I think data science, some really interesting things that are happening in general across industry that can be incredibly impactful for construction. And in fact, we're starting to see in construction, some of our clients in particular, some of the bigger ones, really diving into some of the constructs that we'll talk about. But basically, if you have all of your data accessible via APIs, application programming interfaces, essentially the ability to make data available to third-party tools, and have that data be transferable via integrations to the cloud and to adjacent technologies that can use that data. There's a handful of key constructs and themes that become really viable to construction companies. And the first of which is sort of data lakes and data warehouses. So data lakes are essentially a way of storing data, aggregating data in the cloud. So they'll take data from lots of different sources and drop them into one place. And the benefit there is that data will have different data attributes, labels, mapping, et cetera. If you take data from one system and sit it next to the data from another platform, that'll be slightly different. And if you simply try and bring the two of them together and drop them into the same sort of system, and those two data sets don't have discrete labels or relationships or mapping between them, you can't really compare them. They're sort of apples and oranges. You can't put them side by side and say, well, what is one telling the other? And so that becomes very difficult to then report out on that data. And construction is really dominated by silos of information, and these point solutions have grown up sort of independently of one another, and they're not designed to necessarily talk to one another. There's no common data ontology. There's no common data structure across the industry. So for construction contractors, they need to try and overcome that. And that's really where data lakes and data warehouses come in, because they allow you to bring all of the data together in a single place where you can start to organize it and sort it and structure it and create those relationships between it so that you can start to extract that information. So I think for an industry that is defined by lots of discrete data sources and solutions, getting it into one place is a key place to start, right? And that's why moving from paper to digital is so critical. If it's on paper, you're never going to get there. But at least if it's digitized, you can start to move the needle on that. And candidly, from our perspective at Rhumbix, it's why we really focus on digitizing all of the performance workflows in a single platform. If a company has digital solutions for data reporting and timekeeping and production and quality and safety and T&M and all these other workflows, and they're different tools, it could become very difficult to get that information out and into one place so that you can start to really mine it for data and insights. So that's really one of the big things that we're trying to do to make data and access reporting more easy. It really just follows the standard industry trends. Secondly, I'd say business intelligence tools. And Greg, do you want to chat about BI tools? I'm doing all the talking here.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It would definitely resonate with me. I really think, BI tools and reporting. So BI tools, as they're known, have been around for a while. Power BI, from MS being the most common. They allow you to take all this disconnected data sources and then weave them together into dashboards and reporting. How do you want to see the data visualized? They can be automated, push to the cloud, and more mobile. All sorts of clever stuff that is impossible, and the data is otherwise in an Excel spreadsheet. Really allows you to take the data you need and empower change there. There is amazing content out there on BI solutions. So if folks are unfamiliar, feel free to reach out to us and we can share some best practices on how to approach it. What we've seen some of our customers leverage that have been impactful for them, happy to share that as well. We've embedded a solution at the Rhumbix called Looker, which allows customers to build reports, share them internally and externally, email data, and it is all automated. You don't have to manipulate data or files at all. The data and reporting is just there. BI is really, really very powerful.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just
leads to automated reporting and insights. Guy, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sorry, you one step ahead of me there, but yeah, no, it's all good. So, ultimately, what a lot of this is driving at is the production data, but actually all sorts of insights. This whole trailer talk was about production data, but you could extrapolate that to any sort of domain of reporting within construction that you're interested in, whether it's materials, procurement, contracting, any of those sort of key areas of construction project management where you have this data when you're trying to derive and mine insights from it. You could layer this on. It's just production tracking happens to be the area of focus that we're most interested in, but really you could apply the same layer to anything. What we're driving at is the idea that production data shouldn't be locked away in Excel spreadsheets that are managed by a project manager on their desktop or within SharePoint. Or the data should only really come out of an ERP once a week in a frankly a pretty dull report that no one wants to look at. Modern approaches really empower there's key attributes of data that you're looking for, which is sort of sharing between stakeholders, generation of insights. And some of the tools and approaches that we've spoken about today really start to help contractors move away from the status quo of cage reports and inaccessible insights to solutions where data and metrics and answers and opportunities are A, much more available, but B, they're much more efficient to generate. It's a really broad topic and it can be approached in a lot of different ways. And actually it needs to be, because no two companies are alike and everyone's at a different stage of maturity around digitization, innovation, and the adoption of these tools. And there's no one size fits all. It very much depends on your tech stack and what answers you're trying to derive from it. But from a production tracking perspective, this is one of the big areas of innovation and production and performance measurement and reporting that we see in construction and actually in general in industry today. So yeah, we think it's a huge area that the construction companies need to be aware of, and they're starting to become increasingly more aware of it. But there's a lot of pitfalls and best practices that can be pursued and pitfalls that need to be avoided when trying to work out how best to achieve it.
Well, this has been a great session, you guys, and thank you very much for your time. And thanks to all the viewers for watching this episode of Trailer Talks by Rhumbix, and we'll see you next month.
Awesome. Thanks, Tyler.
Thank you.